Good afternoon. I'm Tiffany Jones, and I'm the Program Director of Higher Education Research and Policy at the Southern Education Foundation. The mission of SEF is to advance equity and excellence for all students in the South, particularly low-income students and students of color. I'm here with Amanda Assalone, SEF Postdoctoral Research and Policy Analyst, Autumn Blanchard, SEF Director of Marketing and Communications, and Deborah Dyack, National Association for Developmental Education President-elect, and Dean of Education Programs and Learning Support at Schoolcraft College. During the course of the webinar, we will first address the importance of studying developmental education at minority-serving institutions, explain the institutional partnerships, why the campuses were selected for the interventions and outcomes, provide a teaching and learning perspective from DevEd faculty, and finally, discuss next steps for scaling DevEd work and recommendations. Please feel free to post questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A function. It's found at the top of your screen on the right-hand side, and direct questions to all attendees as we will pause after each speaker and field a question or two. We will continue the conversation on Twitter immediately following the webinar. You can follow us at Southern Ed Found and also using the hashtag SEF Higher Ed. I would like to turn it over to Amanda Assalone, SEF's Postdoctoral Research and Policy Analyst, to begin with a discussion about SEF's MSI Consortium for Innovation and Change.
Thank you, Tiffany. The Southern Education Foundation's Minority Serving Institution Consortium for Innovation and Change was instituted in 2011 to advance creative and promising initiatives that enhance institutional practice and student outcomes. In keeping with the SEF mission, these innovations address educational barriers that disproportionately affect degree-seeking, low-income students and students of color in higher education. Our commitment to giving good ideas a fair test leads this work in hopes of identifying a set of best practices that may be cultivated within the education community as a comprehensive set of interventions to best serve those who inspire our work. This project was devised to increase DevEd effectiveness, which is critical to the degree attainment and college success for low-income students and students of color. SEF engaged 5 minority-serving institutions, along with the technical review and support team, to launch DevEd Innovations. The 5 campuses represented both 2-year and 4-year public and private colleges and universities across the southeastern and southwestern United States. Additionally, the campuses included HBCUs and HSIs, creating a window into a space that is often understudied, but is home to a number of our target population. All involved eagerly engaged in this work to answer the pressing question of what can be done to mitigate the barriers to degree attainment for those who currently require DevEd. Each campus participating in the MSI Consortium for Innovation and Change executed a plan for supporting the academic success of first-year students whose level of academic preparation suggests they would benefit from additional academic support in order to be successful in college-level courses. Each model employs a strategy aimed at increasing the success of these students in their first-year college-level math and/or English courses by providing them with condensed DevEd courses through summer bridge programs or academic support through structured labs. These strategies represent evidence-based approaches to course acceleration, and research suggests these approaches significantly decrease the time spent in DevEd courses without threatening success in credit-bearing courses, while also reducing the time it takes for the students to complete a college degree. The campuses that participated in this project include, first, California State University San Bernardino implemented the intensive math program that allows participating students who require 1 or 2 DevEd math courses the opportunity to finish their DevEd course requirements prior to their first semester by completing a 5-week summer bridge program. Cal State San Bernardino was able to increase enrollment and evaluate the program for improvement and development, and 98.7% of the students successfully tested out of the required DevEd course after completing the summer math program. Claflin University applied an extended course model that combines former DevEd courses with credit-bearing courses in mathematics and English. It was taught 5 days per week and included tutorial support and computer lab time for mathematics. Claflin designed and incorporated performance-based academic assessment strategies into the courses and formalized the strategies that involved the Writing Center and associated tutors. Students who enrolled in the Extended English 101 course had a lower passing rate than the control group of similar students participating in the traditional English 101 course. However, the students in the program who passed and moved on to English 102 had higher course completion rates and grades than the students who participated in the control group during the previous semester. Texas Southmost College developed the Accelerated Developmental Math course, which combines introductory and intermediate algebra courses into 2 consecutive 8-week sessions rather than the traditional format of 2 consecutive 16-week sessions. Students were provided with an hour lab attached to each course, where they received support from the instructors and tutors and completed online assessments. The students in the Accelerated Math program had higher retention, course completion rates, and grades than the students in the traditional course model. However, the college-level math course completion rates were slightly lower for the students who participated in the Accelerated model. Morgan State University created a Developmental Humanities initiative, which includes hands-on interdisciplinary projects across the disciplines of reading, English, and history. Faculty members engaged in course redesign to create the interdisciplinary syllabi across DevEd and non-DevEd courses. The syllabi were also designed to increase student engagement and academic identity development by incorporating culturally relevant content. The takeaway here was that students who participated in the integrated courses had higher attendance, course completion rates, grades, and final test scores than similar students who did not participate in the integrated course model. Finally, the University of the Incarnate Word created a co-requisite model of the college-level algebra course with the mandatory lab for students requiring DevEd. The additional hour gave the instructor the opportunity to remediate based on specific deficiencies indicated by the placement exam while still meeting college-level learning outcomes. Participating students were described as bubble students who just missed the college-level math cutoff score. Students who would have otherwise been placed in traditional DevEd courses but were enrolled in traditional college-level math courses with an additional math lab had similar final course grades and slightly lower final test scores than students who did not test into DevEd courses. Now we will return to Tiffany, who will facilitate questions and answers.
Thank you, Amanda. We now have time for a question or two. To ask questions, please use the Q&A function at the top of your screen on the right-hand side and direct the question to all attendees. Please feel free to ask direct questions about any of the information about the consortia and their activities that Amanda presented, or more general issues related to developmental education, teaching and learning, and equity issues. Okay, we'll take a few more seconds to see if we get any other questions. And if not, we'll move on to the next portion of the webinar. Okay, so we don't have any questions at this time, so we will move on. And so we will have a few more opportunities to ask questions later in the webinar. Now, I would like to introduce Dr. Deborah Dyack. She's the President-elect for the National Association for Developmental Education, and we're very pleased to have NADE as a co-sponsor for this webinar today. So Deborah, if you could take it over.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Tiffany. NADE's delighted to be partnering with the Southern Education Foundation. Thank you for including us in today's webinar. Advance. If you could advance, oh, there it is. There we go. I'll share an overview of NADE for those of you who may not be familiar with us. NADE, the National Association for Developmental Education, is an organization of over 3,000 members, 30 state chapters with special interest groups and offers committee opportunities at the state and national levels. We provide our members and other developmental education practitioners with professional support, research, and leadership opportunities for the purpose of student learning and student success. Students are always at the heart of what we do. Like the Southern Education Foundation, NADE is committed to college access and college or goal completion. Our organization has always encouraged educators to take into account the whole student when assessing college readiness by considering cognitive as well as non-cognitive variables. We know our students come to us with a wide range of backgrounds and abilities. We encourage the use of multiple measures to ensure proper placement. We support and initiate professional development opportunities for members and offer accreditation for qualifying institutions for the purpose of maintaining standards and rigor in services and coursework. And I see professional development as a critical factor in the future of developmental education and NADE. NADE values partnerships with organizations such as the Southern Education Foundation to promote equity and quality developmental education practices across all institutions of higher education. I'd like to provide just a brief definition of developmental education because it's often misunderstood by non-practitioners. It is an actual field of research, practice, policies, and leadership, which is rooted in cognitive and developmental psychology for the purpose of bridging the gaps in students' learning, regardless of where they are on the readiness and learning spectrum. Many confuse developmental with remedial or remedial for developmental, and remedial education is certainly an important part of our work, but our courses, services, and research are for students at all levels of skills and abilities in higher education. One of the many reasons our partnership with the Southern Education Foundation is so promising because as developmental education continues to experience significant, and I'll even say historical reform, we can work through the redesign together. Both organizations are cautiously optimistic about some emerging and promising new practices which are being shared in today's webinar. However, we want to be certain that changes in policies and practices are beneficial, specifically to students of color and students of poverty. NADE acknowledges the need to change. Contextualizing content, embedding skills into coursework, teaching students how to learn, introducing metacognition, and creating relationships are just a few of the ways to improve student success in all classrooms. We know that some of the traditional practices may not consider alternative options for our marginal students, those bubble students which were discussed earlier. But it's essential that we find ways to better serve our students based on need rather than a one-size-fits-all approach. Together, NADE and the Southern Education Foundation can share research, pilot, and promote what is working and discuss those practices that may not have the desired outcomes for our students. Working together will ensure that college access and college completion for all students is supported and realized, especially by those who may be currently underserved. Thank you, and we look forward to our working together.
Okay. Thank you, Deborah. We really appreciate you sharing those thoughts. We especially appreciate you providing the perspective of faculty members and those teaching developmental education courses. Do we have any questions for Deborah at this time? Any questions pertaining to any issues around professional development for developmental education instructors, or what some of this movement around developmental education reform might mean that she alluded to? Okay, so we have a question. This is for Deborah, and the question is, what would you say to someone who says not all students are meant to go to college?
I might agree with that person, because some students, there are many professions and that may not require college, but I think that everyone should have equal access to college if they so desire, and I think it's our I guess, responsibility as educators to make sure that we provide them with the best education possible. So ensuring proper placement and using multiple assessments and finding out what students' needs are and making sure that we track students from the beginning through the end will ensure their success. And then at least we've provided students with options. And I think that's the key factor. We need to provide our students with options.
Great. Wonderful. And also we would echo here at SEF a similar perspective that definitely the purpose is to provide every opportunity to students so that they can make whatever choice, whether that be college or something else that they may desire. So thank you, Deborah. We have time for another question, if there are any. Okay, if not, we will move on. Thank you for your questions. And so now we will hear from SES Director of Communications, Autumn Blanchard, who will discuss SES recommendations for advancing developmental education.
Thank you, Tiffany. SES and the Technical Review and Support Team worked closely with the campuses to examine the effectiveness of the interventions Amanda mentioned earlier, with 3 campuses executing random assignments and 2 utilizing comparative analysis. The findings demonstrate that on average, the students who would otherwise be required to complete a traditional DevEd course sequence, but instead participated in the interventions Amanda discussed, yielded either similar or better course outcomes than like students who required DevEd, but did not participate in the interventions. In some cases, the students participating in the interventions had similar to better outcomes than even students who did not require DevEd. Higher education leaders and policymakers are exploring how to improve academic success and degree completion through the improvement of DevEd. Therefore, it is critical to highlight a few lessons learned for scaling strategies similar to those piloted by the campuses in the MSI Consortium for Innovation and Change that Amanda alluded to earlier. I'll begin by addressing the first of 5 recommendations we put forth. The first is that one size does not fit all, but ultimately there is no need to dress the same. It is important to offer multiple DevEd options for the multiplicity of student needs that may exist on a single campus. Although it could take concerted effort and resources for campuses to transition to offering one or more of these options, we will see a return on their investment in the form of increased retention and completion rates. However, the effectiveness of these strategies is dependent upon continuous improvement of placement tests and methods for assessing student skills. Thus, SEF provided support to campuses like UIW to continue experimenting with different placement exams. The aim is to enhance correct placement, which will inform the refinement of academic support strategies, course performance, and student success well beyond first-year courses. For example, boot camp strategies, which act as fast-track 2 to 4 week review sessions of old material, which tend to work better for adult students who have learned skills but haven't used them recently, but work less well with younger students being introduced to the material for the very first time. This speaks to the importance of utilizing unique strategies that are the best fit for the audience that expresses a need. A major takeaway from this particular study is that it is important for institutions to disaggregate data to know how all students are performing to determine which solutions will best serve a specific segment of students. Our second recommendation is that promoting inter-campus collaboration is also critical. DevEd should not be singularly relegated to academic support offices or departments. In fact, DevEd impacts various divisions of academic and student affairs. Thus, these different parts of the campus must be engaged to ensure new DevEd strategies are successfully implemented and evaluated. Getting buy-in from senior academic and administrative leaders is key to ensure organizational support and necessary to coordinate multiple academic and student services departments. An example that illustrates this is that recently admitted students who head to campus for introductory tours are sometimes surprised to find themselves in a room being tested for placement into math and English courses. We should be asking ourselves, why is this?
If academic support, admissions, and advising departments work collaboratively, they can better inform and prepare students for placement testing. In some cases, this will motivate students to study for the test, prepare them mentally to be confronted with an exam on their first day on campus, and engage them in the choices they can make to ensure they start their college career off on the best foot possible. Another important recommendation is the fact that how it works is as important as what works when discussing developmental education improvement. Program assessment is critical at MSIs because existing research on DevEd is not always inclusive of MSIs or specific to the experiences of Black or Latino students. Lastly, use of qualitative and quantitative strategies to study program impact is critical to telling a robust story about if and how initiatives are working. Qualitative methods can be especially helpful in understanding how these particular initiatives work at MSIs and for students of color in particular. This not only gets us thinking about the important inner workings of DevEd programs, but also uniquely positions MSIs as experts from whom all universities can learn as they figure out how to best support students who are identified as needing DevEd and are increasingly diverse in their backgrounds and experiences. An example of this is adult learners requiring non-traditional course schedules. Taking that into consideration, intervention courses can be scheduled in the evenings or weekends to better meet those students' needs. Our next recommendation suggests that developmental education reform should include an emphasis on teaching and learning. Instructional strategies and academic support remain critical issues that must be addressed. An example of this is that most DevEd courses are taught by adjuncts who are given little support in teaching the most academically vulnerable students. By focusing reform efforts on supporting these instructors, we can improve the quality of education students receive. Finally, our last recommendation suggests that developmental education reform efforts must center on equity issues, especially issues related to race and racism. As the issue of disproportionately labeling low-income students and students of color as quote-unquote remedial is being mitigated by DevEd reform, higher education must continue to wrestle with why these students were disproportionately labeled remedial in the first place, and how low expectations of these populations permeate other aspects of higher education, such as advising and discipline issues. The findings from this group of pilot studies and the data from DE reform across the nation suggest that students who were previously labeled as underprepared or not college ready can be successful in college-level, credit-bearing courses without traditional DevEd courses, which challenges higher education's often deficit view of these students.
Okay, great. Thank you, Autumn. We did receive a question during your presentation, and so the first question was, does SEF or NADE help colleges' program directors calculate and communicate that return on investment? And so I'm guessing that they're referring to potentially some of the recommendations we made in terms of investing in these new strategies. And so I will speak about SEF, and then Deborah, you're welcome to chime in if NADE has a perspective on this as well. And so part of our work now is focused on partnering with these campuses and their leaders to figure out how to scale these initiatives, and so determining the return on investment in using these new approaches is definitely a critical part of that process that we are working with them on. But I definitely think that's a great question, and it will be key to being able to sustain new strategies. So if it means more academic support up front, obviously these things cost money, and we know that particular campuses, struggle with institutional resources. So definitely being able to demonstrate that these investments are worth it is going to be important to solicit support of senior leaders on campus as well as other campus supporters. And so I will stop speaking there. And then Deborah, did you want to weigh in?
Yes, I would just have to say I totally agree. Earlier in my presentation, I said that I believe that the future of developmental education is that professional development is going to be a critical factor, and I think that colleges need to invest in our students and in the process, and NADE is in the process of developing professional development opportunities, certification for colleges. We also offer an accreditation program to make sure that the coursework is current and is including all of the current best practices. So we totally concur. We agree that there has to be a lot of work done, especially since most of the new faculty are going to be adjuncts, and that's going to be critical in the success of it. And I hope I answered that. I kind of went a roundabout way, but professional developmental education, we will be providing opportunities through NADE to offer those. We also have state chapters where we are working with colleagues to present best practices. So all the state chapters will be helping their state community colleges and universities, as well as the overall NADE, the overarching organization.
Okay, great. And just to follow up on that, we also received a question from someone wondering more specifically, what types of support do adjunct instructors of developmental education courses need, and how would we recommend schools go about supporting them? Deborah, do you mind weighing in on this question?
Not at all. I think one of the biggest factors or things to consider is teaching students how to learn. I know that sounds very obvious, but students come to us underprepared and they don't know how to use their ability to learn. And so teaching students how to organize large amounts of information, and especially in today's world, is absolutely critical. We also need to focus on reading. The assumption is that students have difficulty writing and with math, but they can read, and that is another skill that is lacking. Also, I think what I said earlier, teaching faculty how to contextualize real-world skills within a class, making it, and I think you had mentioned this earlier too, making it as relevant as possible in the classroom so that students understand why they need to develop the skills. We're telling them they need to develop their math, reading, and writing, but I think by contextualizing it, it will make it critical. Also, by embedding skills, the study skills within the classroom is going to be critical. If students are having difficulty with time management, if they're having difficulty with motivation, those are skills that can be nurtured and developed within classrooms. And the last thing I'll say is I would love to see the developmental education departments make sure that they're not working in isolation, that the skills and all of the attributes of success are not being taught in isolation, that we are working together and we are learning the same things to teach students how to learn more effectively.
Yes, well, thank you, Deborah. And to build on what you discussed, we also have an example in one of our projects, particularly with Morgan State University, where we were trying to provide support to the faculty by creating opportunities for them to weigh in on the curricula and the design of the syllabus, which we know that adjunct instructors do not always have the opportunity, as well as collaborating with other full-time faculty within their departments and across disciplines. And so we paid special attention to, so part of the investment was support so that these instructors had an opportunity to participate in those type of activities that are usually reserved for full-time faculty. And so we also agree that that was a really important aspect. And we've gotten a few more questions asking more details about the projects, one about length. And so it varied across campuses. Some engaged in a pilot for 1 year, and some have engaged in the studies for up to 3 years, where they're trying the experiment continuously for each fall for the last 3 years. And so we actually have Morgan State University and Claflin University who have done 3 years. And a really good question about, what are some of the institution's biggest challenges in implementing the DevEd interventions, point to this discussion earlier around faculty. Some of it has to do with capacity and time. All of these institutions, you know, benefited from the investment in the project, but sometimes there's other pressures in the way of, you know, other teaching responsibilities, other initiatives on campuses that can sometimes pose challenges to being able to do the pre-work necessary to implement the interventions. And so that was one challenge that we saw, and so we tried to solve that issue by providing support for additional tutors or instructors where necessary that could assist in actually implementing the design programs. And so I will move on to another question, and just to let everyone know, we've gotten a few questions about whether or not this will be made available. The recording of this webinar will be posted on our website, southerneducation.org, as well as the actual PowerPoint. So I know we had a few questions about that. And then we also had a question stating, are they sustaining or expanding the interventions beyond the grant project in time frame? Which is a great question. And again, this is one of those that varies across campuses, but I can provide an example. One campus we had the pleasure of visiting with last week are actually making plans right now, this is Morgan State University, to scale the intervention to actually serve all of the eligible students who are testing into developmental education reading, as well as their college level history course, and trying to be able to serve, which would amount to nearly 5 times as many students as they did during the pilot, so that this becomes the default approach for the institution. And so, of course, I guess sustaining it over time will be dependent on, you know, how well it goes in terms of scaling this year, but we're partnering with them to do that work. Okay, and so we had another question about asking were any of the example programs for online students, and that's a very good question. And these experiments, we were narrowly focused on students who took in-person courses. Some of that had to do with the fact that many of the campuses were four-year institutions. In fact, most of them were, and many of them residential campuses. But I will actually defer to Deborah, if you might want to say one or two things about any special things that our attendees should be thinking about as it pertains to any special ways of thinking about DevEd for online students. Are there any special initiatives already that may exist, or any special strategies or work being done to address these specific student needs?
No, interestingly enough, I know that Robin, our current president, is working on some research regarding online. And right now there aren't a lot of data out there to support effectiveness. So that is one area of that we are researching and we are investigating. So that's one of those things that will work together to see what is effective and what isn't. But right now, I would hate to tell you false information because I don't believe there are enough data to support the work for our lower level courses, the remedial courses.
Okay, and then I have just one question here that I think will flow into our next question. Someone asked, is there any recently published qualitative work on how students at MSIs reflect on and perceive their DevEd experience inside and outside of the classroom? I think that that's a great question. We've tried to capture this quantitatively and qualitatively with this work, and we'll have a few more follow-up reports coming out this year that will get into some of those themes. And then I'll defer to Autumn, who also had a follow-up question as it pertains to equity in DevEd.
Yes, one of the questions we were challenged with was what specific advice would you give to a program or even an individual teacher on a campus trying to take equity up as an important theme within on their specific campus, or taking it up as an important factor that needs to be addressed?
And Deborah, we would love for you to weigh in. I'll go ahead and weigh in from SES and give a couple of examples. I think one strategy, so if you're trying to center equity and developmental education issues, what could you do in terms of your reform efforts? I think one thing is who can you partner with on campus? Who are your equity experts on campus in academic affairs and student affairs, and what can you do collaboratively to coincide these academic pieces with other parts of students' development is key. And so we saw that throughout these interventions as well as the existing research, making sure to understand that student needs, go beyond just the academic content. But there's also folks who've been in the business of designing support for students of color, for low-income students for a long time, and so are there ways to collaborate and incorporate some of those aspects into the classroom? And another piece would be also to provide some direct support and training and development to faculty who are instructing these courses around the specific needs of their students, address issues of bias or assumptions, and just provide some best strategies for serving the students that are in front of them. And the last recommendation would be when you're trying to track whether or not your strategies are effective, whether your developmental education programs are effective, you have to disaggregate your data, definitely by race and income, to determine whether or not students are having desirable outcomes and if there are any gaps between groups, so that you can then establish strategies to help address those gaps. So those will be three recommendations that I would make. Deborah, did you want to weigh in at all in terms of equity, and if folks were interested in helping their developmental education programs become more equity focused, or if there were any strategies for that? Would you like to weigh in?
Well, one of the things that I would say is, obviously I agree with everything that you just stated, but I would say know your students, involve your students in the process. I love the question that someone asked a few questions ago about what did the students think about it. It's great that we as professionals are putting together a new redesign for developmental education, but it doesn't mean anything if we don't include students in the process. By including students, we'll get to understand where students are coming from and learn about their needs more deeply. And to me, effective education, and even going into the workforce, it's all about building relationships. And if you don't know the students whom you're serving, it's very difficult to provide quality instruction. So I think it's all about relationship building, and that means telling stories, sharing, allowing students to have a voice, and allowing students to have some control over their education. Instead of the education happening to them, that they're allowed to take control, and not only allowed to, but it should be under their control. And I'm just trying to think of all the strategies that I said before to incorporate it. It boils down to, again, professional development opportunities. But the main thing for me, number one, is including students in the process, getting to know your students.
Thank you, Deborah. I think that's so helpful because we've gotten lots of feedback from some of the program coordinators who have shared with us that oftentimes, because resources are limited, sometimes they are forced into making decisions about different things without it necessarily being rooted in research. So I think this is really helpful for them to be able to kind of get a sense of things someone can do on an individual level to really be effective when it comes to, if you need to go on your own recognizance mission and collect information from a specific student or talk to somebody on an individual level, other faculty members and things of that nature, to make sure they figure out how to empower themselves to take up equity as an important thing.
Yep. And just to build on Deborah's comment, we got another really great question about the research related to adult students in developmental education, and we had an opportunity to actually speak with a non-traditional age student last week who participated in one of the interventions. To your point about the value of hearing from students themselves, who just appreciated the fact that, you know, using this approach where there was overlap between multiple courses and how that was helpful for a student who had been out of the classroom for a while and coming back in and getting acclimated was really important. And so there were aspects about the initiative and its value that we learned about. We learned about some of the challenges, and so for us, definitely talking to students, and we recommend this for other faculty and DevEd coordinators who may be on the line, speaking with students can just give you some really unique insight into how these initiatives are working, but also making sure that you touch diverse groups of students. And sometimes those available students are going to be your traditional age, those around campus a lot, but making sure that you touch non-traditional age students as well, and making sure that they are benefiting in some ways. And there are aspects of the initiative that we thought were very valuable that, because of the realities of being an adult learner and your availability, weren't significant for this particular group of students, right? There were other things that were mostly focused on what happened in the way of making the instruction clear during an instruction time was important for this student. And so just an example of how important it was for us, because all of our other focus groups have been with traditional age students, that was definitely an eye-opener and encourages us to continue to get feedback from students. So we will pause. If you all have any other questions, we may have time for one final question. And we did get another question about the best way to follow the research. What's the best way to follow the research into online support? So Deborah, you were speaking a bit about some of the work that's being done around online developmental education. Do you mind sharing if there's a resource or two or a place someone might be able to learn more?
Absolutely. With NADE, we do have focus groups, or special SPINs we call them, special interest groups, and one is on online learning. So they post information on NADE.net, which is our homepage, and we post current research and best practices. We have a lot of publications out there on best practices, and certainly online is a focus. So if someone were interested, they could contact one of the SPINs that specifically focuses on online learning for more current research. But we have a lot of publications and right on the home page that students, faculty can access.
Okay, thank you, Deborah. And so at this time, we'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining this webinar. We will have information regarding our future work in developmental education, events, and webinars on our website, southerneducation.org. We also will continue this conversation on Twitter immediately following this webinar. You can find us at Southern Ed Found. And you can also use the hashtag SEF Higher Ed. And we'll also make sure to make a recording of this webinar available on the website tomorrow, and please look for future webinars regarding this topic from us in the future. So thank you again to NADE for co-sponsoring with us and joining us today in this conversation.
And thank you.